Hello out there. Sorry, this is my first webinar, so I'm hoping that everything goes well. I do ask that you offer me grace because I am new to this, and like I said, this is my first one. And so I want to get started. Hopefully, it's going to be recorded, and you will catch up. So what we're going to be talking about today is fundraising, actually engaging your board, energizing a board and engaging them towards fundraising. So as we go along, sorry, I'm making a connection here. As we go along, if you hear anything, see anything that you would like to further discuss, just post some questions. So let's get started here. So how to energize your board, engagement towards fundraising. I am Sabrina Walker Hernandez. A little bit about me. I studied political science and public administration. I obtained a nonprofit management certification from Harvard Business School. And for the last 25 years, I have worked in the nonprofit industry in direct services, operations, and executive leadership. In 2018, I was diagnosed with cancer and I felt I needed to retire. Since then, I've been helping people take their nonprofits to the next level. So I have a lot of experience. The organization that I was in, I grew it, the budget from $750,000 to $2.5 million. This organization is in the third poorest county in the United States. And it's sometimes considered a rural area. I would say more suburban, but it's a combination of rural towns. So let's get started here. Those who will benefit from this webinar will be nonprofit CEOs who feel that their board just don't get it. A lot of nonprofit CEOs feel like that. Nonprofit chairs seeking to govern effectively, and anyone looking to enhance their board of directors meetings. So here's the solution. The way you streamline your board meeting is very critical. So prior to the meeting, I would suggest that you have a meeting location and setup. The location should be set up for comfort and functionality. Now, some nonprofits choose to have their meeting in their actual nonprofit facilities, and some choose to have it off-site. I say if your clients are in, you serve your clients in your nonprofit facility, it will be great to have the meeting there. Because they're going to be able to, your board will be able to interact or at least be reminded about why they serve and who they serve. Also, I would suggest that you have food. Food should be provided at a board meeting, determined based on the timing. So if it's a lunch meeting, of course, you should provide food. If it's an evening dinner meeting, you're asking these volunteers to give up their dinner time, so provide them with food. One of the suggestions that I would make is, if budget is a constraint or a question and you say, I don't have the money for food. One of the things that I did when I first implemented this is I went to local restaurants and asked them to sponsor a board meeting, and basically they sponsored the meal for the meeting. I said, we got this meal donated to us by this restaurant. They're located on this street. I encourage board members to go in, and when you go in, mention our organization so that they know that their sponsorship was worthwhile. It doesn't take much to feed board members, maybe $50 to $100. So restaurants will be more than happy to do that. And I say stick with the local chains if you have, because local respond better to it. So preparation. Send your board packets out a minimum of 72 hours in advance. This gives your board members time to look at and review the information. When you send it out via email. Say, if you have any questions about anything in this packet, please let me know prior to the board meeting, because other board members might have the same questions, and then allow me time to research the answer and get the information that you need. But it's very necessary to give them at least 72 hours so that they're prepared. Time, develop a timed agenda. If you meet monthly, the board meeting should be no more than an hour and a half. And when I say a timed agenda, basically you're going to have a column that says, this is the item. The next column will say, this is the description. The next column will say who is presenting. And then the next column will say, this is how much time you have. Streamline your meeting. So prior to the meeting, you're already stepping in to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. So shaping your agenda. The board chair the executive committee and this ED or CEO should plan the agenda. It should not just be the CEO sitting out trying to come up with the board agenda or the board chair. It should be a group effort. That is what engaging the board means, having those active committees, making sure that they're involved in planning those agendas. Next slide. For 30 minutes of your board meeting. Now, this is the quick part of your board meeting, and I think this should be the quick part because we're going to get to the end about the other part and how that engages in fundraising. So the agenda item 1, remember I said you have your agenda divided up into different columns. So agenda item 1 should be a mission moment. You should allow about 5 minutes of your board meeting to that mission moment. You should feature a related story or inspirational anecdote, preferably by a client. So for me, it was a little easier because we were a youth serving agency. And so what I would do is I would have a youth come to the front of the board, come to present to the board. And basically they came in, they said, this is my name, this is what grade I'm in, this is what school I go to, this is what I enjoy about this organization, this is what I would improve about this organization. And then the board members got to ask them some questions. And literally it didn't take more than 5 minutes. Now it serves a dual purpose. Because 1, we want our board members to have a story of the clientele. And so if you're offering every month a different story to different client to present their verbal story, your board members is going to retain that. And when they're going out to ask for money or talk about a club, they're going to talk about that kid or that client, and they're going to tell that story. So this is a very valuable 5 minutes of your board meeting. Agenda item 2 should be consent agenda. It takes less than 5 minutes. I put up here allocated time of 5 minutes to do a consent agenda. It's a compilation of the items that the board approves with one vote. It is one vote. This includes the minutes, financials, the CEO report, program committee report, staff appointments, volunteer appointments, committee appointments, correspondence that require no action, and any other items, perhaps even we had on our consent agenda, grant awards, grant application submissions if the grant called for that, but they all went under consent agenda. Now, if an item is on consent agenda and someone wants to discuss it further, you can always have a motion to remove that one item from consent agenda so that it can be discussed. But most of the time, again, if you send them their board packet 72 hours in advance, they've had a chance to review it, and you've encouraged them to say, if you have any questions about any items, please let me know so that I can then respond to the entire board, because I know you can't be the only one that have that question, and educate them. Then you will have less items removed from the consent agenda. Okay. Now, item number 3, you're going to have up to 10 minutes for this, and that's the review and approval of items requiring board approval that require more discussion and cannot be included in the consent agenda. So that might very well be like if you were going to start doing bingo, that's not a consent agenda. Board want to talk about that. We're going to be an agency that's going to be benefiting from bingo revenue. That's something that requires some discussion. So you would not put that on your consent agenda. It's the first time your board is hearing about it. It's going to be some questions. So don't set yourself up and put that on consent when you know that that is not an item for consent. The other agenda item, number 4, is board training and education. Now, this is very important. Allow up to 20 minutes for board education and training. This is an opportunity for you to do some skill building with your board members on topics such as fundraising, roles and responsibility, telling our story, advocacy. So this is a very prime time for your board to start being educated. It amazes to me that there are some boards who don't know their roles and responsibility. Or, you have those board members that say, I don't want to ask for money. I'm afraid to ask for money. Well, this would be a great time to do a presentation on fundraising for the ask, where you could even do some role playing, where you could talk about, the four levels of cultivation, of fundraising, where you talk about, there's 4 steps. We have to identify the prospects, we have to cultivate them, we have to engage them, and then ultimately we ask for money, and then steward them. And so give yourself that 20 minutes to educate your board members. And so we've covered 4 agenda items, and we're only about 30 minutes into the meeting. And you see how that can streamline your meeting, but also get people talking about what you want them to talk about. So the last item, now this is where the meat of your agenda is. You're going to spend about 40 or so minutes here, and it's going to be agenda item number 5, and that's governance and strategy. Discussion would be based on the organization's strategic goal. So here's my assumption. My assumption is that you have a written strategic plan. But if you don't have a written strategic plan, that is okay. You still have the goals that you know, the informal goals that you know, that your organization is striving for. And most of the time they're around some type of fundraising goal. Those are usually a general nature, maybe some board development goals, fundraising goals, board development goals, community engagement goals. Those could be it. Again, if you don't have it written, that's okay. I'm going to encourage you to get a written strategic plan. But if you want to start off with your informal goals, you can do that. And you're going to spend 40 minutes talking about that. So you've been to those meetings where you go into that board meeting and you talk and you leave and you have no next steps. How frustrating is that? Most board members are corporate people or bank people, and they for some reason check their hat at the door when they're dealing with the nonprofit boards. But the same strategies that help corporations are the same strategies that help your nonprofit. And so let's talk about the goals. So if you had every month, you're talking about your fundraising goal, and you know that month you're going to launch your annual appeal, or you're going to be launching your golf tournament, whatever your special event, whatever it is, that's always going to be on the forefront of the agenda. You're going to have 40 minutes to talk about pieces of that topic, and you can then there assign next steps under fundraising. If it's community engagement, like I said, whatever those 3 strategic topics are, and I would keep it to 3, that's where you spend the meat of your conversation talking about those things. I cannot encourage that enough. It will not be a waste of your time. The next slide we're going to be talking about is the last hour as well, agenda item number 6. Now, these are the governance or generative questions. That takes about 15 minutes. Generative questions are talking about where the future of your organization is. It is a way for the board to examine a issue or an idea by generating more information about it, identifying the problem instead of solving it, generating questions instead of answers, and making sense before making any decision. So I mentioned the bingo one earlier. So if you talk about how the problem, so we have a revenue shortage. You're not talking about the solution of solving that, but it's those future challenges that you see on the forefront. It's a challenge to get your board to start thinking like that. So you spend about 15 minutes. You don't want to frustrate them in the process, but it is very important that you start thinking about those generative discussions. And so that is the last hour. You have 40 minutes of your strategic plan and your strategic goals, no more than 3. And then you talk about governance and generative, about the future. You're talking about ideas, more information about ideas that were brought to the table. You focus on problems instead of solving the problems. So you not throw everything at the wall. It's not brainstorming, but you do present them with one generative question. They generate that question and you start talking about it. I think the best thing that I can say for me, when I experienced this generative question, was bringing the idea of being a benefactor of the bingo revenue to my board. There was a lot of discussion around that. People talked about, well, is it moral? Is it ethical? What other organizations have done it? Those questions. And as a CEO, I sat there and I took notes around that discussion. And my next steps was to come back to the next board meeting and say, here, or send an email. I did try to send emails in between the board meetings, of course, because most of the work is done in committee. And so sometimes with those generative questions, you might even get a little ad hoc committee going. But for this particular incident, did the research, sent the information out to the board, then brought it back to the board. And then we said, yeah, let's get some ad hoc 2 or 3 people to kind of look at this. And eventually we did decide we were going to go as a bingo. We're in the state of Texas, so that's a revenue for nonprofits. That's one of their charts of work. It says that, you know, their revenues have to benefit nonprofit, has to be distributed. And so we did decide to go with that. But if we didn't have those generative discussions, this would not have been a topic that we would have discussed. Another generative discussion that we had and that want to share with you is we talked about actually a social enterprise. And for those that don't know what a social enterprise is, it is basically kind of the business side of your nonprofit. So you create a business that's going to then fund your nonprofit. Most of you know Goodwill, they have their clothing store, the Salvation Army, they have their clothing store. So that's a social enterprise. And so we talked about that similar process. It came up during a generative discussion. We did some research on it. We even brought in a consultant to tell us about social enterprise. And so what we wind up doing is doing a rental company where we rent moon jumps, we rent tables, we rent chairs, we have a truck that delivers the items, that picks up the items. That's the one that sets up the items. And so it's become a lucrative, and we also rent part of our facilities for birthday parties, baby showers, basketball tournaments, because we have access to a gym. So you never know what's going to come up from those generative discussions. So I really encourage you to have those, because you will get some gold from those discussions. If you use this approach for your board meeting, you will increase your board effectiveness and engage your board towards fundraising. I just went over several examples about how aligning my board agenda in this way. We talked a lot about revenue sources, the rental company. We talked about the bingo. We talked about several items, but this is all getting my board excited about fundraising, getting my board to start thinking in that generative fashion, getting them to focus on the strategic process. So this process will increase the board's sense of ownership of the mission, the budget, strategic priorities, and fundraising strategies. And it's going to invite them to do the same with your donors. So if you're taking your board through this process where they are learning about mission moment and they're focused on the 3 strategic goals and they're doing generative questions and they're donating, they're going to get excited. Okay, now you're speaking their language, because as I mentioned, a lot of our board members come from the corporate background. And so they're very used to this dialogue with their corporate board. And you need to bring that over to your nonprofit board. But imagine if your donor is out there and they're able to speak to the donor, potential donor directly. You don't necessarily as a CEO has to go on the make the ask meeting on that meeting, because they feel very comfortable. They have a client story. They know what your 3-year, your 3-year, 5-year strategic goals are. They have this is some of the innovative things we're doing. They can talk about your generative discussions. They're excited. And so that excitement will translate over into potential donors. They feel very comfortable talking to potential donors about your organization. You are on it. And so they appreciate that. So I will say this: by streamlining your board agenda and focusing your meeting on strategic and generative discussions, your board will achieve greater commitment in reaching your organization's fundraising goals. So track record. I used this approach for 15 years as the CEO of a nonprofit organization. The board raised over $2 million each year and had a give or get policy of $5,000 each. Let me say that again. We had a give or get policy of $5,000 each. We are located along the Mexico-Texas border in the 3rd poorest county in the United States. And we had a give or get of $5,000. We also had and this is going to be a discussion for you to have with your board in general, but we also had a minimum individual board gift that each board member had to donate. And that was $500 for us. So our board came in knowing I have to personally give $500, and then I had to give or get $5,000. And it makes the conversation It makes life easier for them when they know why they're going out and ask for this money, because you put your clientele at the top of every meeting to them. And if I didn't mention this, you also have your mission statement written at the top of all your board agendas and at the top of all your board minutes. So you got your mission statement, then you have the client coming in and telling their story, and they're armed with that. And then your board meetings every month, or at how often you meet, are focused on the strategic goals. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about those 3 strategic goals, and you're doing generative questions. So if you're following that blueprint, your board is going to get excited. I cannot stress that enough. So for the next discussion, what we've covered, let's just kind of go over what we covered. I've been kind of weaving that in throughout this presentation. So now that we've covered how to take your board from board to engage during board meetings and ultimately impacting fundraising, I would like to further my discussion with you. And how would you further that discussion? It's very simple. One of the things that I would like to do is thank you, first of all, for attending my webinar. And if you're looking at this in rebroadcast, I thank you. This is my first one. Again, I'm a little nervous. Had some tech difficulties at the fore end, but thank you for hanging in there. If you're interested in going deeper into this and would like to explore how this all relates to you, I want you to book a call with me. So you can go on my website, www.supportingworldhope.com, and book some time with me. So on that call, we can discuss how an engaged board relates to fundraising, what you should do when your board resists the changes, because you will have some resistance. How can you apply the format we discussed, and working onwards together after this. I will be doing a online course called 6 Weeks to Sustainability, and we'll be talking about that. I am very excited. Again, this worked for me for 15 years. We went from $750,000 to $2.5 million using this blueprint. I am a strong believer in not wasting your time. This could work for you. So feel free to ask any questions related to the content of this webinar or my offer. There is a chat button there. If you have any questions, it will be greatly appreciated. If not, again, my website is www.supportingworldhope.com. Go on there, book a call with me. I love to discuss this with you. It has been my pleasure. My pleasure doing my first webinar. So thank you so very much, and have a great day.